Chapter 21: The Unfathomable Crown Prince. The key to this battle lies with Wilhelmina. Joseph had considered this issue for a long time. As long as the Patriot Party can hold out a little longer, and we make good use of Wilhelmina and place some troops on the Franco-Prussian border, Prussia should withdraw its troops. I will submit a detailed plan to the Marquis de Saint-Priest in an official document. The Queen nodded. Very well. I will decide whether to continue the aid based on the Minister of War's opinion. Just then, Louis XVI, who had been completely silent, suddenly spoke. There's no need for a government appropriation. I will personally contribute 600,000 livres to aid the Patriot Party. After he said this, he gave Joseph a positive smile. Brienne immediately breathed a sigh of relief and bowed to Louis XVI. Thank you for your generosity, Your Majesty. With this money from Your Majesty, the Treasury can temporarily suspend its appropriations to the Patriot Party. We can then decide whether to continue the aid 2 months from now, depending on the situation in Holland. He turned to Queen Marie. Your Majesty, does this seem acceptable? The Queen nodded. Very well. Let's move on to the next item. Yes, Your Majesty. Brienne glanced at the Crown Prince with some trepidation, fearing that he would stir up trouble again. Fortunately, Joseph didn't say much about the subsequent budget cuts, and most of them passed smoothly. The cabinet meeting then discussed some other miscellaneous matters and was nearing its end. Queen Marie signed the last 2 documents and, without looking up, asked Brienne, "Archbishop Brienne, I heard that the tax bill is not going well." She was referring to the new tax reform bill that the government had been pushing since the beginning of the year. Its main contents included making the privileged noble class pay land taxes like ordinary people, allowing the free transport and sale of grain, abolishing the corvée labor system, increasing stamp taxes, and so on. The purpose was, of course, to increase financial revenue and fill the deficit in the Treasury. If implemented, it would actually be beneficial to the common people. However, the tax reform bill was unanimously opposed by the great nobles and had not been passed in over half a year. Because of this, the previous Minister of Finance was sadly dismissed from his post. Brienne's face was bitter as he nodded. Your Majesty, the new bill is being held up by the Parliament. The news I have received is that they are very likely to reject it. According to French law, a tax reform bill needed to be registered with the Parliament and then signed by the King to officially take effect. And the French courts were firmly controlled by the noble class, so this bill, which affected their interests, was stuck at the registration stage and could not be implemented. Queen Marie's voice was a little tired. You know our financial situation. The tax bill must be implemented as soon as possible. Yes, Your Majesty, this humble servant will do my utmost. Joseph was shaking his head inwardly. He knew that, according to the original historical trajectory, Brienne would never be able to get the bill passed. In the end, Louis XVI, in a desperate move, and on the advice of some hardliner, stripped the Parliament of many of its powers, exiled the stubborn judges, and replaced them with a full authority court led by the royal family to forcefully pass the bill. However, the great nobles immediately used this to stir up public opinion, portraying Louis XVI as a tyrannical despot who ignored the law, triggering a nationwide anti-tax movement that led to chaos in the country's finances. Louis XVI, who had no power over public opinion, was unable to defend himself, and in the end, he had no choice but to bring back the exiled judges and restore the Parliament's power. The Parliament then terminated the tax reform bill that had been implemented for a short time. The worst impact of this matter was that the great nobles were now sure that the king couldn't defeat them. From then on, they became even more arrogant and overbearing. In desperation, Louis XVI had to convene the Estates General, hoping that the common people would support him against the nobles. As for the result, the nobles used the Estates General to incite riots. However, this coincided with the Great French Famine of 1788, and the situation subsequently spiraled out of control, leading to the outbreak of the Great Revolution. Joseph looked at Brienne and thought to himself, "You want the nobles to accept a bill that makes them pay more taxes? Isn't that like asking a tiger for its skin?" To implement tax reform, you first have to harshly strike at these nobles to make them understand the power of the monarchy. Only then will they obediently pay taxes. In addition, he had to firmly control public opinion. These great nobles were most skilled at twisting facts, inciting public sentiment, and profiting from national chaos. Only by allowing the French people to hear the government side of the story and know the truth would they not be used by the nobles. He took a deep breath. By becoming the assistant to the Minister of Finance, he had taken the first step. However, to change the course of history, he would inevitably face many obstacles. But whether it was the stubborn nobles, the church, or the capitalists, if they dared to cause trouble, he would not be polite. That's all. The meeting is adjourned. The Queen's voice interrupted Joseph's thoughts. He and the other ministers all stood up, bowed to the King and Queen, and prepared to leave. "Joseph, don't go yet," Queen Marie called out to him. Joseph had no choice but to come back and sit down. After the other ministers had left the meeting hall, the Queen looked at him with a smile. "Joseph, you did a very good job with the police reforms. The Saint Antoine district has clearly become the safest place in Paris." She paused and sighed. "However, this police reform must be stopped." "Why is that?" The Queen said earnestly, "After your reforms, the police's salaries are too high, and they are all paid for by the municipality. You were paying the police with your own money before, but the city hall simply cannot afford this amount. The safety of the common citizens will still have to rely on civilian patrol teams." Joseph, however, said without hesitation, "Public safety is very important. I believe that not only should we not stop, but we should also promote it throughout Paris and even the entire country. As for the money, you don't have to worry. With me taking over, participating in financial management, the treasury will soon be full." Queen Marie looked at her son with interest. "Where do you plan to get the money?" Joseph paused. He thought to himself that steam engines, steel making with blast furnaces, rubber, mining, cement, and even armaments could all earn tens of millions of livres. But he couldn't tell her about all that. He hesitated for a moment and chose a few things the Queen would find acceptable. For example, finance, real estate, and luxury goods. In any case, I'm confident. Queen Marie frowned, feeling that this was a little unreliable. After thinking for a moment, she said, "How about this? I'll give you 6 months. If you can solve the police salary problem, you can continue with the police reforms. Otherwise, you must return it to the way it was." "Very well. I think it won't take 6 months." Louis XVI looked at the time and said to his wife and son, "It's almost time for lunch. No work should get in the way of lunch." He took both of them with him toward the royal dining room. In the corridor, Joseph remembered something and asked Queen Marie, "Mother, do you have a suitable candidate for the Paris police superintendent?" "The police superintendent? You should ask Count Marepus about that." "Yes, he will accept my recommendation." The Queen was stunned and quickly figured out the key to it all. "You're blackmailing him with the Guizot matter?" "Absolutely not," Joseph said with great sincerity. "I'm just helping to set his mind at ease." End of this chapter. Chapter 22. Planning the Police Academy. Seeking monthly votes. Queen Marie looked at her son with curiosity and smiled. "No wonder he proposed for you to become the assistant to the Minister of Finance today. How exactly did you persuade him?" Seeing that Joseph was smiling but not speaking, she didn't press him further. After thinking for a moment, she said 2 names. Besançon, who has served as a trade coordinator in several provinces and led the gendarmerie in clearing out smugglers. He has considerable ability in planning and management. and Friant, who was a captain in the Flanders Brigade and served as my guard. He is now in charge of recruiting new infantry soldiers and is very good at training and organizing regulations. She added, I can guarantee their loyalty. As for which one to use, that's up to you. Joseph nodded. Very well, I will get in touch with them and then make a decision. He wasn't familiar with either of them, but as a newcomer to politics, he had no one to rely on. He could only ask the Queen for help. He suddenly had an idea. By taking control of the police system, he could invest in building a police academy to recruit students from the common people. This would have two benefits. First, it could train professional police officers and reduce the influence of the nobles on the police force. Second, he could offer subjects like management, commerce, journalism, and law, and select outstanding talent to cultivate his own direct line. A scene suddenly appeared in his mind. In the near future, a group of high-ranking government officials would salute him and respectfully call him principal. Well, in terms of political strategy, the Wampoa model was very successful. He heard a creak as a door opened. Joseph looked up and saw that they had arrived at the entrance of the dining room. The huge dining room was already filled with nobles who had come to watch. Yes, starting from the time of Louis XV, anyone could watch all the activities of the French royal family, including eating, sleeping, entertaining, and even giving birth. Joseph's head started to ache. He was pulled by the Queen to sit at the spacious and luxurious dining table. The master of ceremonies struck the ground heavily with his staff, followed by a melodious bugle call. This was the fixed ritual for serving food. Music would be played for every dish, which would be passed through several people and be subject to a bunch of fancy procedures before it could be eaten. Joseph suddenly remembered something and leaned into the Queen's ear. By the way, if the Minister of the Navy comes to you to talk about the plan to cut the shipbuilding budget, just send him to me. I will persuade him. Queen Marie looked at her son with surprise. To be honest, she was just worried about this matter. Castries was a stubborn and fanatical man, and if his budget was cut, he might pester her for a month about it. She nodded with delight. My son can now help me with my worries. Thank God. Meanwhile, on a staircase on the west side of the Palace of Versailles, the Minister of Justice leaned his head toward the Duke of Orleans. Judging from the Crown Prince's performance, is he siding with Britain? The Duke of Orleans narrowed his eyes. Maybe it's the Austrian horse idea. If the reduction of the fleet causes the British to adjust their policy toward France, it will be very unfavorable for us. In a square about 2 li away, Maurepas and the Minister of Records, Nicot, walked side by side under the sun. At the very least, the Crown Prince should be firmly anti-Prussian, the Minister of the Interior said. Anti-Prussian and anti-British is a hardliner. Anti-neither is a pacifist, Nicot sighed. What I fear most is someone who is anti-Prussian but pro-British. To put it plainly, it would be a disaster if France had a monarch like Peter III. He was referring to the previous Russian Tsar, who had worshipped King Frederick II of Prussia since childhood. He even ordered the Russian army to withdraw from the war against Prussia when Russia had a clear advantage, and signed a treaty with Frederick II that was extremely unfavorable to Russia. After the cabinet meeting today, everyone was worried that the Crown Prince was a British fan. Maurepas shook his head slightly. I have had contact with His Highness. He is an extremely intelligent person. His proposal to cut the Navy might just be because the battleships are too expensive, not because he wants to curry favor with the British. I hope so. The general situation in the cabinet meeting was quickly relayed to the office of the British ambassador to France. After the ambassador, Harriet, heard that the French Crown Prince was proposing to stop the construction of all battleships and was taking a firm stance against Prussia, he was in deep thought for 3 full minutes. He then called over a confidant and gave him some careful instructions. After his subordinate left, Harriet solemnly wrote a report about the matter and sent it back to Britain. A lunch where even the first bite had to follow strict rules finally ended. Louis XVI, full of excitement, took Joseph to his workshop to see his latest masterpiece and gave him a brass safe he had made himself before letting him leave. When Joseph returned to his chambers, Dr. Lamarck was already waiting for him, asking Purnell about the Crown Prince's recent health. Although Joseph had his own personal doctor, Purnell still insisted on coming every day to check on the Crown Prince's condition. Seeing Joseph return, Lamarck quickly came forward and bowed. "It is truly inspiring to hear that Your Highness's condition is under control. I think this must be the effect of that magical salicin." Joseph smiled and returned the bow, and also Dr. Purnell's care. Purnell was standing nearby and said in a voice as soft as a mosquito's, "I haven't obtained my doctor's license yet." "Purnell's skills are better than most doctors," Lamarck praised his assistant, then took out a small glass bottle and looked at Joseph with enthusiasm. "Your Highness, Mr. Lasserre and I have produced several batches of salicin, and the purity is getting higher and higher." Joseph took the glass bottle and looked at the beige powder inside. He praised, "You are indeed the best biologist and pharmacist in Europe. The purity is already quite high." No, I didn't do anything. You told me the whole purification process," Lamarck said humbly, then continued excitedly. "I have been giving away salicin for free in the area around the Pont Neuf, and the effect is very good. I found that it's not just for pneumonia. This medicine is effective for fevers caused by many illnesses. In just a few days, it has saved the lives of 7 or 8 people." He paused for a moment and said with some uncertainty, "Your Highness, Mr. Lasserre and I have discussed raising some money to produce salicin on a large scale. This medicine will save the lives of countless people. What do you think? Of course, half of the profits will belong to you." He then whispered, "However, as you know, most of the poor people who are suffering from illnesses don't have a lot of money." "Raise money to make medicine?" Joseph shook his head. "If we do that, the production and sales of the medicine will be controlled by the investors." Lamarck was surprised. "What do you mean?" "I will provide the funds to build a pharmaceutical factory to produce salicin." Joseph remembered the homeless people he had seen slumped in a corner of the St. Antoine district that day. The profit will be kept within 3%, and people can even exchange willow bark for the medicine. Lamarck and Purnell looked at him with reverence. "Your Highness, you are truly too benevolent. May the Lord bless you." Chapter 23. The Dream Battleship. Lamarck hesitated for a moment and said to Joseph, "Your Highness, I feel it's my duty to remind you that this pharmaceutical workshop will probably require an investment of 50 to 60,000 livres. If you only make a profit of 3%, it will probably take a very long time for you to recover your costs." Joseph smiled and shook his head. "That 3% is an emergency fund for any unforeseen circumstances. I have no intention of making money from this medicine." He wasn't trying to be a saint and throw money away. He had a solid business plan in mind. Salicin as a medicine could save many lives, and selling it at a low price was a good deed. However, this substance wasn't just used to reduce fever. It was also a very effective cosmetic. Even in the 21st century, salicylic acid, which is the oxidized form of salicin, would still be added to products for treating acne and rejuvenating skin. There was a famous saying in his past life, "Whose money is easiest to earn? Of course, it's women and children." As long as the packaging and marketing were done well, a bottle of salicin beauty product could easily be sold for a dozen or more livres, and those noblewomen would snatch it up like crazy. Lamarck said, "You are truly great. On behalf of countless ordinary citizens of Paris, I thank you." Joseph waved his hand. "It's nothing." Lamarck was eager to promote this miraculous medicine throughout Paris and immediately suggested, "Your Highness, I know a very suitable place to build a workshop. What do you think?" Joseph thought about it. Purifying salicin doesn't require very complicated equipment. Building a workshop from scratch is too inefficient. It would be better to directly acquire a pharmaceutical or chemical reagent company. His attendant, Aymard, suddenly said, "Your Highness, may I interject?" "Please do." "I remember there is a perfume workshop among the royal properties. It has been losing money for a long time and is about to be sold. It might meet your requirements." "You have been a great help," Joseph nodded. "Do you remember the asking price?" "I think it was 26. Before he could finish, Joseph suddenly patted his forehead. "Since it's a royal property, why should I pay for it? I'll just ask the Queen for it." When Queen Marie heard that her son wanted to produce affordable medicine to help the common people, she immediately agreed and asked her lawyer to handle the formalities. In less than half an hour, the perfume workshop was transferred to the Crown Prince's name. Joseph had wanted to go see it in person, but a servant came to announce that the Marquis de Castries was asking to see him. Joseph had no choice but to let Lamarck handle the pharmaceutical factory and go to the drawing room to meet the Minister of the Navy. In the spacious drawing room, Castries saluted respectfully and went straight to the point. "Your Highness, Her Majesty the Queen asked me to discuss the construction of new battleships with you. I believe they absolutely should not be cut." Joseph smiled and interrupted him. "Marquis de Castries, I'd like to ask you a question first. Why do you want to build so many battleships?" "Of course, it's to deal with the British." The Minister of the Navy's tone was as hard as steel. "To defeat the fleet they are so proud of, take back the colonies they stole from us, and humiliate them, just as they humiliated my grandfather back then." Joseph nodded. "Then, even if the Treasury fully supports you in building ships, do you have the confidence to defeat the British?" Castries was prepared this time. "If we ally with Spain and use the right tactics, there's a chance." "The chance is very small," Joseph said bluntly. "And when it comes to naval tactics, the British are better than us." Castries' expression darkened for a moment, but he was still defiant. "How will we know if we don't try?" Joseph gestured for him to drink his tea, his expression very calm. "What if the Navy was equipped with battleships that could travel at a speed of over 20 knots, carried 25 42-pound cannons and 30 24-pound cannons, and were wrapped in an iron shell? With those and the existing battleships, do you think you could defeat the British fleet?" "That's an unrealistic fantasy," Castries smiled. "If we had such a battleship, I could make the British piss their pants." Chapter 24. Steam Engines and Carronades. Joseph looked the Minister of the Navy in the eye and said seriously, "I promise you, these fantasy battleships will begin construction as early as 1 year from now and as late as 2 or 3 years." Castries was shocked. Are you serious? How is that possible?" Joseph took a sip of his tea and confirmed again. "It's true. I am completely confident." "So don't continue to waste money building the current battleships. In 2 or 3 years at the most, they will all be useless." "I won't make you wait for too long. I will be going to the port of Brest in a while. You will understand everything then." The reason he was so confident was that the steam engine had already been invented, and the craftsmanship and technology were very mature. The only thing lacking was the low power output caused by unreasonable design. But this was not a problem for Joseph at all. He had seen not only Watt's small modifications, but also more advanced steam engines. Castries felt dizzy. His mind was jumping back and forth between doubt, excitement, and imagination. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Joseph then instructed, "Go and coordinate with the shipbuilding department. Tell them to start preparing the craftsmen and raw materials. The trial production of the new ship will be a complicated process." "Very well," Castry said. He had started to believe the Crown Prince. After all, that dream battleship was too tempting. "I will go to the shipbuilding department now." He suddenly stared at Joseph, his voice trembling a little. "Your Highness, you must keep your promise." "Please rest assured." As Joseph said this, he remembered something else. "By the way, when you go back, you can gather craftsmen to build a type of large-caliber, short-barreled cannon." "Huh?" "Just extend the existing mortar," Joseph said. "It fires shells of 60 pounds or more, but the barrel and powder charge are less than half of a cannon, so it's very light and won't be too difficult to manufacture." Castries was puzzled. "Your Highness, this cannon should have a lot of power, but the range will definitely be very short. What's the use of that?" Joseph smiled slightly at him. "I'll tell you when I get to the Brest shipyard." In reality, this was the carronade that would later cause the French Navy so much grief during the Battle of Trafalgar. The current French Navy had always had a misconception, which was to blindly emphasize range. In an ideal state, if my range is greater, then I can hit you, but you can't hit me. Wouldn't I be guaranteed to win? However, this was where the French Navy's theory was detached from reality. In the age of sailing battleships, a ship's maneuverability was not very good, so it was difficult to keep both sides at your maximum range. Also, solid shot lacked power, and a long-range hit would have a hard time causing serious damage to an enemy ship. In an actual naval battle, most battleships were face-to-face, almost wanting to shove their cannons right into the enemy's captain's cabin for a broadside. And at that time, range was meaningless. The one with the largest caliber cannon was the true master. The British had noticed this and directly gave up on range, developing a large-caliber, short-barreled, heavy cannon, the carronade. However, in this life, it would be the French Navy's turn to be the first to be equipped with this great weapon. Joseph and the Minister of the Navy communicated back and forth, and after confirming that he had no objections to his plans, Joseph personally saw him out of the drawing room. Before Joseph could catch his breath, Aymard hurried over and bowed. "Your Highness, the Marquis de Saint-Prest is asking to see you." Joseph didn't expect the Minister of War to be so impatient, but this was good. This way, he wouldn't have to write that document. Chapter 25. The First Bucket of Gold. Unlike his meeting with the Minister of the Navy, Joseph received the Marquis de Saint-Priest in his study. He had all the servants sent away, and the guards outside the door retreated 10 meters. After Joseph finished explaining his plan in detail, the Minister of War was shocked. "How do you know she's in Nijmegen?" Joseph thought to himself that he'd seen it in a documentary, but he could only pretend to be mysterious. "Ah, that's a secret, but the information is absolutely reliable." Saint-Priest's brows were tightly knit. It took him a while to finally nod with great difficulty. "This, while it's feasible, the risks are also very high. You know, even the best spies can fail. A single mistake could trigger a war." Joseph smiled. "Don't worry. Even if the matter is leaked, as long as Wilhelmina is safe, Prussia will announce it publicly according to our version of the story. This is because their economy is also in a very poor state, and they absolutely do not want to go to war with France." The Minister of War fell into deep thought for a while, then stood up. "This matter is too important. I must report it to Her Majesty the Queen before a final decision can be made." Of course, Joseph saw him to the door and then suddenly said, "Marquis de Saint-Priest, shouldn't you thank me properly for this matter?" The Minister of War was slightly stunned. The Crown Prince had helped him get the budget for Holland and had even created an action plan. He had been so focused on implementing it that he had forgotten to thank the Crown Prince. He nodded repeatedly in shame. "I really should thank your Highness properly." Joseph smiled. "Then give me a gift." "Please, Your Highness, just say the word." "Well, give me 20 of your best spies." Saint Priest almost started crying. He thought to himself, "Your Highness, you're so young, but you're more ruthless than a robber. 20 spies, and they have to be the best. Do you think I picked my spies up off the street?" He said with a bitter expression, "Your Highness, the entire army doesn't have 20 top-tier spies. 18? 2 at most. 15? 3. I really don't have any more. 12, no less." The two of them bargained back and forth. In the end, Joseph managed to get 3 top-tier spies and 8 ordinary spies from the Minister of War. Although the number wasn't large, this would be the first brick in the foundation of the French CIA he was building. Today was destined to be a busy day. As soon as Saint Priest left, the 2 people recommended by Queen Marie came to see him one after the other. Joseph had an in-depth conversation with them and got a general understanding of their personalities and abilities. Based on their own wishes, he finally decided to let Besson be the Paris police superintendent, as this was a position that required management skills. Friant was also a good talent, and Joseph naturally wouldn't waste him. He let him serve as the head of education for the Paris Police Academy, which was in the planning stages. Joseph would of course be the principal himself. Friant had extensive experience in training new soldiers, which would be very helpful for training police officers. "So, your most important job after you take office is to promote the police reforms throughout Paris," Joseph said to Besançon. "I have already had all the regulations and reorganization plans compiled into a book. You just need to follow it." "Oh, the public safety pressure in the Saint-Antoine district has been relatively low recently, so you can transfer some people from there to evaluate the other districts. If that's not enough, I can have the Guard Corps help you." Caxode, who was standing nearby, twitched an eyelid. He felt that ever since the Crown Prince started the police reforms, the Guard Corps had become more and more like a group of errand boys. Besançon made a serious note of it and thought, "Your Highness, I have some understanding of the police reforms. If we were to reorganize the entire police force of Paris, the salaries alone would require about 50,000 livres a month, plus the cost of uniforms and equipment. City Hall definitely can't afford this much money." The Paris City Hall's police budget was only 8,000 livres per month. Joseph said, "You don't have to worry about the money. I will give you 50,000 livres shortly, and it will be given to you every month from now on." "Yes, Your Highness." Joseph then looked at Friant. "Your workload will be a bit heavy. Your first task is to find a location for the police academy. It can be a bit remote, but the land price should be cheap. The other issue is the teaching staff. Right now, the only people we can use are the experienced police officers from the Saint-Antoine district, but that is far from enough." Friant immediately said, "Your Highness, I know a lot of retired veterans and even officers. They should be able to handle drills and combat training." "Very good," Joseph nodded happily. The training standards of the army were far higher than those of the police. "Go and contact them as soon as possible. Their salary will be based on the standard of a city official, with an additional 30%. "Yes, Your Highness." "In addition, we also need to hire teachers for finance, commerce, journalism, and law. The police academy will have these courses." Friant was puzzled. Why would a school that trains police officers teach these things? Besançon's mind was more agile. He immediately said, "I think Your Highness means that only by being familiar with the methods criminals use can we catch them. I remember when I first started chasing smugglers, I didn't even know how to calculate tariffs or which goods were easy to smuggle. I didn't catch anything for several months. It was only after I seriously studied how to smuggle that I finally caught the first group of smugglers half a year later." "That's very true." Joseph nodded in approval. Police officers must be more professional than criminals to effectively deter and combat crime. Friant had never heard of these advanced concepts. He was deeply shocked and kept nodding, quickly writing in his notebook. Joseph gave them a lot of other detailed instructions and allocated 20,000 livres in startup funds to Friant before sending the two of them away. Returning to his chambers, his personal accountant immediately came with 2 spending receipts for Joseph to sign. Joseph looked at the total expenditure of 70,000 livres and couldn't help but sigh. He had a little over 200,000 livres in private assets. Before, he had spent 20,000 on police salaries and 10,000 on necessary supplies for the pharmaceutical factory for Lamarck. Now he only had a little over 100,000 left. Money really flowed out like water. He had to quickly increase his income, or he would run out of money very soon. He immediately remembered his plan to make cosmetics with salicin. He never expected that what he had made as a casual fever reducer would now become the fastest way for him to make money. He sent the accountant away and said to Aymard, "Please help me order a batch of things." The attendant immediately took out paper and a pen and began to write, "Please give me your instructions." 50 kilograms of glycerin, 1 kilogram of rose essential oil, 500 7-ounce glass bottles, and the same number of small wooden boxes, just big enough to hold the glass bottles. The boxes should have a hot stamped design. As a person who had a hard time coming up with names, Joseph paused for a few seconds. He then remembered the SK2 facial treatment essence his former roommate had bought for his girlfriend as a birthday present. He thought the name sounded quite catchy, so he said, "Hot stamp, angel water." All these things must be of the best quality. Don't worry too much about the price. Yes, Your Highness, I will go and take care of it now. Chapter 26. The Terrible Debt. The next day. On his first day as the assistant to the Minister of Finance, Joseph went to the south wing of the Palace of Versailles very early. The Minister of Finance's office was on the first floor there. As he hurried along, he couldn't help but remember the feeling of rushing to punch in at work every morning when he was doing projects in his previous life. But he also used this as an excuse to avoid the complicated breakfast ritual. He simply ate some bread, grilled fish fillets, and vegetable soup, which saved him a lot of time. When Aymard helped him open the door to the Minister of Finance's office, he immediately saw Brienne angrily hitting the table, his voice low and full of indignation. "These selfish wretches, they talk about equality and justice, but all they care about is money. Don't they know this will strangle the entire nation's finances?" Joseph walked over and picked up the overturned brass penholder on the table. He asked, "Archbishop Brienne, who are you angry at?" A clerk next to him quickly whispered, "Your Highness, the Parlement officially refused to register the tax bill yesterday afternoon." Brienne sighed and said bitterly, "Those greedy nobles, just for a little land tax, they want to destroy France. Don't they know that when that day comes, they will also go to hell?" As a relatively upright clergyman, this was already the most vicious curse he could utter. He turned to Joseph and apologized. "Your Highness, I apologize for letting you hear such impolite words." Joseph waved his hand, indicating, "It's nothing, Archbishop. I can understand your feelings." Then he picked up the thick stack of bill documents that the Parliament had returned from the table and saw the "Refuse to Register" stamp on them. "Archbishop Brienne, what are you planning to do next?" Brienne closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, looking defeated. "We can only make more compromises and then seek the support of the Church to persuade those selfish and greedy people as much as possible." Joseph shook his head inwardly. The other identity of those great clergymen was that of nobles. It was a pipe dream to expect them to follow religious doctrine and save the world. Seeing that he was silent, Brienne sighed again. "I actually know that this might not be of much use. May the Lord bless France." Joseph frowned slightly. He had to get involved in the tax bill matter. This incident seemed to be just about the nobles not wanting to pay more taxes, but it was actually a test of the monarchy's power by the noble class. Historically, Louis XVI had used both carrots and sticks for the bill, but he was beaten back again and again by the nobles' use of the courts and public opinion. After this, the nobles confirmed Louis XVI's weakness and took power from the royal family even more recklessly, making the country more and more chaotic. So Joseph had to nip this in the bud. He had to get the bill implemented in the shortest amount of time, suppress the arrogance of the noble class, and let them know that the monarchy was the father of the nobles forever. This matter seemed difficult, but it wasn't. What the nobles relied on was nothing more than the Parliament's right to register bills and the ability to guide public opinion to incite the public against the royal family. For the former, the French courts were notoriously corrupt. There wasn't a single person in the judicial system who was clean. As long as he caught them doing something dirty, there were many ways to handle them. As for the latter, using 21st century internet propaganda and various new media tricks to deal with the nobles' so-called public opinion tactics would be like an adult fighting elementary school students. Joseph thought for a moment and looked at Brienne, as if comforting a helpless old man. "Archbishop, things may not be as bad as you think. Perhaps the bill will be passed in another 2 or 3 months." "I hope so, Your Highness." Brienne nodded and walked with heavy steps toward his office on the west side. "I'll see if there's anything else we can compromise on in the tax clauses." Joseph also returned to his office on the east side and asked his assistant to bring him the internal financial data to read carefully. The more he understood France's financial situation, the more shocked he became. He was also impressed with the successive ministers of finance. He didn't know how they had managed to keep the nation's finances from collapsing. France's total debt was 2 billion livres, most of which was national debt. 60% was held by French citizens and 40% was held by foreigners. The interest on these national debts was between 8% and 12%, which meant that the annual interest alone was 200 million livres. The total annual financial revenue of the country was only 500 million, and 40% of it had to be used to pay interest. There was no way to even think about paying back the principal. Historically, it was not until after the Great Revolution that the National Assembly confiscated all the church's property, and Napoleon's war profits from his campaigns barely managed to plug this huge hole. Besides the national debt, there was an even more terrifying type of debt: short-term bank debt. This was a short-term loan borrowed from banks in the name of the state when the treasury was short on cash. It was usually paid back after selling national bonds, but the interest was as high as 15 to 25%. Although this short-term debt was less than 120 million livres, the monthly interest paid to the banks exceeded 1.8 million. And although they were called short-term debts, given France's current financial situation, they were basically a case of borrowing new debt to pay off old debt. They were basically no different from long-term debts. While Joseph was worrying about the debt problem, his assistant knocked on the door and entered. He saluted and said, "Your Highness, the people from the Laborde Bank said that due to a temporary business change, the loan negotiations need to be postponed. The specific date has not yet been determined." Joseph nodded without much thought. "Thank you, I know." Only then did he remember that one of his main duties as assistant to the Minister of Finance was to negotiate short-term loans with banks. To put it bluntly, it was the act of borrowing new debt to pay off old debt. He picked up the list of important matters that his assistant had already prepared and saw that there was a loan negotiation with the Laborde Bank at 2 p.m. This money was mainly used to pay off a 6 million one-year national bond that would mature in 1 month. According to the original plan, this money would be borrowed from two banks, and it would be repaid with the income from national bonds 2 months later. The interest rates in the past were 18% and 19%. It's really easy to make money by opening a bank in this era, he couldn't help but sigh. This interest rate would be considered usury in the 21st century. End of this chapter. Chapter 27. The Sword. Joseph said to himself with a smile, "I need to open a bank myself if I get the chance." He finished reading the financial documents, pushed the file basket aside, rubbed his aching shoulders, and then picked up the new tax bill to read. The bill had a lot of clauses, more than 30 pages in total. The more Joseph read, the more he frowned. The people who drafted these bills must have been geniuses. They crammed a bunch of messy and irrelevant things into it. Even a person who had received a higher education in the 21st century felt dizzy reading it. Expecting ordinary citizens to understand this stuff was simply a pipe dream. And it seemed that they were afraid the bill would be obstructed by the nobles, so the drafters deliberately added some taxes that favored the noble class and were unfavorable to the common people. They just didn't expect that these taxes, which had little impact, would become the point of attack for the nobles. Ordinary people couldn't understand the details of the bill, and when they heard public opinion claiming that the bill would harm their interests, they joined in the opposition. In reality, the core content of the bill was to cancel the land tax privileges of the nobles and make them bear some of the national finances. It also contained clauses that allowed for the free transportation and sale of grain and the cancellation of tariffs between different regions in the country to promote economic development. This bill fully reflected the weakness and compromise of Louis XVI's government. It was like mixing shit with sugar. He wanted to please both the nobles and the common people, but the result was that neither of them liked him. With this in mind, Joseph picked up his pen and crossed out every single tax clause that was unfavorable to the common people and small business owners. This was the way of politics, pulling some people in while fighting against others. After the deletions, this bill was no longer a bargaining chip for the noble class to use against the government. Instead, it became a sword to attack them. Joseph checked it carefully again. When he was about to give it to his assistant to recopy and organize, he realized it was already dusk. Never mind, I'll do it tomorrow. He stretched and tossed the bill into the drawer. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Since there were no urgent circumstances, he wouldn't do the unethical thing of forcing his subordinates to work overtime. As soon as he walked out of the office, he saw Aimard with a maid. "Your Highness, Her Majesty the Queen is hosting a gambling game in the Hall of Mars and has invited you to participate." Joseph felt a little like laughing. A mother inviting her son to gamble felt so strange. But he also knew that this was a very normal form of entertainment at the Palace of Versailles. Even the Sun King Louis XIV had specifically requested in his instruction to the Dauphin that the court hold more of these activities to strengthen the relationship between the monarch and his subjects. Joseph nodded. "Very well, I'll go now." He first returned to his chambers to change into a more casual but luxurious suit for the occasion, and then followed the Queen's maid to the Hall of Mars. Even from a distance, he could hear the bustling sounds accompanied by cheerful piano music from the hall. The guards at the door bowed their heads to Joseph and pushed open the two-person-high doors. Queen Marie, who was playing baccarat under a large portrait of Louis XIV, saw her son at a glance and immediately waved with a smile on her face. "My dear, you finally come!" Joseph quickly walked over and bowed. The Queen was clearly in a good mood. "I heard you were busy with Brienne all day. Go and have some fun and relax. Oh, do you know, I just won 11 hands in a row. I hope you have the same good luck as me." When the surrounding nobles heard that the crown prince had arrived, they all paused and bowed to him, especially the young girls in their silk clothes, whose eyes were filled with adoration as they giggled. Joseph looked at the nobles surrounding Queen Marie, constantly flattering her, and the queen, whose face was flushed with red from winning money and was laughing so hard she was bent over. He suddenly recalled the sentiment of the writer Zweig from a later generation. She was still too young then, and she did not know that all the gifts bestowed by fate are already priced in secret. Just as Joseph was sighing to himself, Maurepas, whose face was white with powder, ran over with a big smile. He eagerly pulled him and gestured behind him. "Your Highness, you've come at the perfect time. We were just worrying about being one person short. Come and play cards with us." A young noble at the card table was stunned when he heard this. He quickly slipped away, making the situation, one person short, a reality. Joseph couldn't refuse the invitation, so he followed the Minister of the Interior and sat down at the card table under the painting of the God of War. A servant immediately brought him wine and drinks. 2 tens. The Count de Papus, at the head of the table, played his cards. The game was similar to Run Fast, but the smallest card was an ace, and the king was the highest. Joseph took a glass of juice, looked at the cards in his hand, and shook his head. Pass. He saw the pile of golden écus and silver livres on the table and couldn't help but think of France's 2 billion debt. He then looked at the ministers opposite him, who were carefree and spending money without a second thought. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Maybe a great revolution is necessary. He was preoccupied with the national debt and was also bad at cards, so he quickly lost 3 hands in a row, losing 12 golden écus. Not far away, more than a dozen noble girls were staring intently at his table. When they saw that the crown prince was a little distracted, they assumed he was unhappy because he was losing. They immediately clenched their fists and gritted their teeth. A few of the girls immediately took action. Some went around to their fathers or uncles and gave them a look that was full of murderous intent and resentment. Others went to their older brothers, pretending to ask about their cards, but secretly pinching a piece of flesh on their arm and twisting it 180 degrees. In fact, according to the tradition of the French court, one was not allowed to lose on purpose when gambling. But the 3 men at the table with Joseph all decided to abandon this custom without hesitation. Maurepas broke up a straight flush from 6 to 10 and played a single 8. The Count de Papus looked at the 7 that the crown prince played, gripped the single 10 and queen in his hand, and firmly said, "Pass." Joseph's luck immediately improved. He won every hand, and in one hand his highest card was only a jack, and his hand was almost all single cards, but he still won. The winning streak made him much more excited. He forgot about the time until he felt a little tired. Only then did he look up at the clock and see that it was already 11:30 p.m. He quickly stood up to say goodbye to his card partners and had Aymard pack up his winnings. He then dragged his tired body toward his chambers. When he left the hall, Aymard came up behind him and whispered excitedly, "Your Highness, you won a total of 156 écus." 1 écu was equal to 6 livres, which meant that Joseph had won nearly 1,000 livres in one night. "Not bad," Joseph said with a sense of accomplishment. "I didn't do any work for half the night and made this much money." But he then remembered the terrifying 2 billion debt and couldn't help but calculate in his mind that at this rate of winning, it would only take about 550 years to pay off the 2 billion. Joseph sighed. To pay off such a huge amount of money, just relying on his own money-making projects was far from enough. He had to use himself as a fulcrum to leverage the entire French Industrial Revolution. That was the only way to solve the financial problems. Therefore, he had to get the steam engine and textile technology up and running as soon as possible,
as well as the accompanying policies on finance and patents. As Joseph was thinking about the Industrial Revolution, he had no idea where he had walked. He suddenly heard his stomach rumble and couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He had been winning all night and hadn't even had time to eat a late-night snack. He looked up and saw that the kitchen was right in front of him on the side of the corridor, and there were lights on inside. Clearly, a royal chef was on duty. He was still quite far from the Crown Prince's chambers. If he went back and then had someone send him food, he didn't know how long he would have to wait. He might as well just have the chef make him something to eat right here. With this thought, he strode toward the kitchen. Note 1. From the biographical novel Marie Antoinette, The Portrait of an Average Woman, by the Austrian writer Stefan Zweig. End of this chapter.
Chapter 28. Encountering Sadako at Night. Seeing this, Amar took 2 steps forward, pushed open the kitchen door, and waited with his head bowed for the Crown Prince to enter. Captain of the Guard Kexode had not expected His Highness to suddenly turn into the kitchen. He quickly shifted his feet, turned to signal to 2 of his personal guards, and hurried after him. Joseph stepped inside and saw that the kitchen was very spacious. In the middle were 6 or 7 huge cutting boards put together, giving off the smell of fish and spices. The area around them was piled with all kinds of ingredients and cooking utensils. Only half of the lights in the room were on, and he didn't see any chefs on duty. He remembered that even when there were no dances or celebrations, there should be at least 3 to 5 royal chefs on duty at night. What was going on today? Joseph walked further inside, went around a 2-meter-high, 4-meter-wide brown storage cabinet, and vaguely heard a rustling sound coming from a corner. But a rack full of pots and metal spoons was blocking his view, so he couldn't see what was happening there. Joseph was a little curious. What were the chefs doing hiding in the corner? Playing cards in their spare time at night? He walked past the wooden rack with a puzzled look. He looked up and saw, in the light of the corner, a person standing with their back to him. They were wearing a wrinkled white robe, had a head of messy black hair, and were not very tall. Joseph then noticed that in front of the person was a huge slanted wooden board. The board was covered in knife marks, and there were a lot of bloodstains around it. It looked extremely eerie in the flickering candlelight. The person in the white robe seemed to be very focused and only heard the movement behind them now. They immediately turned around abruptly. Joseph's pupils constricted. He saw that the person's front was covered in bloodstains. They were holding a black and red pointed knife, and their face was hidden behind their messy long hair. He could vaguely see a pair of round, glowing green eyes, and there were sticky scraps on the hair that hung down to their waist, which looked like the internal organs of something. Joseph's mind went blank. He felt a rush of adrenaline surge through his body. He had only one thought. What the Sadako? He immediately jumped backward, and his back hit the wooden rack with the soup spoons heavily, making a loud, messy noise. He ignored the pain and was about to turn around when he saw Imard flash to his side. He was holding a short sword in his left hand and pulling the Crown Prince behind him with his right. "Protect His Highness!" Imard shouted. Kexode knew something was wrong. He rushed over in a few strides, drew his sword, and stood shoulder to shoulder with the attendant. "Guards!" He shouted again, and at the same time he turned his head to Joseph. "Your Highness, please step back." More than 10 of the Crown Prince's personal guards rushed in. They suppressed the fear in their hearts of the thing, whether it was a ghost or a witch. With a look of readiness to die, they pulled back the hammers of their guns and aimed them at the Sadako in the corner. Just then, the Sadako finally moved. She threw the knife in her hand into the air, put her fingers into her long hair, and squatted down, hugging her head. She let out a piercing scream. Ah! Joseph was stunned. He peered out from behind Imard and suddenly felt that this Sadako looked a little familiar. "Hey, stop screaming," he tried to communicate with the Sadako. What are you?" When Sadako heard his voice, she was clearly stunned. She looked up and peered through the gaps in her hair. Her voice was trembling a little. Your Royal Highness?" You know me?" Sadako nodded desperately. "It's me, Your Highness. It's Purnell. Don't shoot." Kexode cautiously stepped forward and pushed aside the girl's hair. He breathed a sigh of relief, put away his sword, and turned around. "Your Highness, it is indeed Mademoiselle Purnell." Joseph was speechless. He looked at Purnell and the blood-stained wooden board behind her and asked with a puzzled expression, "You? What are you doing here?" Purnell instinctively looked at her hand and found that the small knife was gone. She explained with a wandering gaze, "Well, I was helping Mr. Valiste cut up meat." As she spoke, she frantically wiped the bloodstains off her hands on her brown apron. She then grabbed a hair tie from the ground, tied her long hair back, and hurriedly knelt to curtsy. "Your Royal Highness." Joseph looked at the blood on her face and took out a handkerchief, gesturing, "Wipe your face." Aymard quickly took the handkerchief and stepped forward to hand it to Purnell. She carefully took it. As she wiped her face, a face as white as ivory gradually appeared. On her exquisite face, a pair of pale green eyes looked like two clear emerald beads. Her eyelashes were dark and thick, and the two dimples at the corners of her charming red lips made her look even sweeter. She was a completely different person from the terrifying Sadako from before. Joseph was stunned for a moment and smiled. "I've never seen you dressed like this. You look very pretty." He looked at the wooden board behind Purnell. A small animal was neatly pinned to it with nails. It was a rabbit. Its abdomen was cut cleanly, and its internal organs were perfectly dissected. He couldn't help but ask with curiosity, "Are you practicing dissection?" Purnell was shocked. She waved her hands repeatedly. "I'm not. I didn't. Don't talk nonsense." Joseph stepped forward, looked at the rabbit, and nodded. "Very professional technique. You must have been practicing for a long time, right?" He then looked at Purnell. "By the way, why are you practicing dissection in the kitchen?" When Purnell heard the certainty in his tone, her heart tightened. The Crown Prince actually knew about anatomy. She probably couldn't deny it now. She gripped her right hand with her left, hesitated for a while, and finally seemed to have made a decision. She puffed out her chest and said loudly, "Your Highness, yes, I am practicing dissection." She took a deep breath, as if she had finally said something she had been holding in for a long time. "I believe that the current state of affairs is very unfavorable for the development of medicine. For example, the fact that women are not allowed to study medicine is a serious restriction on medicine and an injustice to women." "I admire my father very much. I have been with him since I was a child, seeing patients. This has made me full of aspirations for the profession of a doctor who saves lives and helps the injured. I know my father loves me very much. He even agreed to let me wear men's clothes to assist him in treating patients. I am very grateful to him. But even so, he still firmly forbids me from going to the operating table or practicing dissection because it will make me unmarriageable. No one is willing to marry a female doctor. That is the reality. However, I still hope that I can become a doctor who can stand on my own and save patients. I don't have access to human corpses, so I can only use animals to practice dissection and familiarize myself with the structure of living organisms. I reached an agreement with Mr. Valiste that I can come here late at night to practice dissection and, in return, cut the meat that the chefs will use the next day. He, in turn, keeps my secret." At this point, her eyes were filled with tears. She had clearly suffered a lot because of this for many years. She sniffled, and her tone became calm. "Your Highness, go ahead and report me. I scared you just now. This is the punishment I deserve." End of this chapter. Chapter 29. Instantly transformed into a fangirl. Joseph looked at the pitiful girl in front of him and shook his head slightly, filled with emotion. He had read in a book by Maugham about the words of a monk named Monk Louis from this era. "I loathe, pity, and despise all female writers. They should be holding embroidery needles, not pens. Only the embroidery needle is a tool they can use with ease." Note 1. Until the 18th century, the status of women was still very low. Even in France, the birthplace of the Enlightenment, women were not allowed to work as writers, doctors, or lawyers, and they couldn't even have a bank account. Society had them firmly tied to the family. As a person from the 21st century, Joseph naturally disagreed with this view. However, the more than 10 people around him all looked at Purnell with strange expressions, as if they thought it was extremely unseemly for a woman to say she wanted to learn how to perform surgery. Even Kexode showed the helpless smile one would have when a mischievous child was acting up. This was because Purnell reminded him of his rebellious younger sister, who insisted on studying law. But his smile made Purnell even sadder. She was tired of the men's playful and mocking smiles. For a moment, she had fantasized that the crown prince in front of her, who had been praised by Professor Lagrange and had a broad knowledge of medicine, might have an enlightened mindset, but the attitude of his captain of the guard easily shattered her fragile hope. The crown prince must have the same thoughts as them, right? Purnell looked up, trying hard not to let her tears fall. But then she saw the crown prince walk toward her, and his voice was full of encouragement. "Dissection is the foundation of medicine. I fully support you in practicing this. Keep it up." Purnell was stunned. Her clear green eyes were full of disbelief. "Your Highness?" Joseph picked up the dissection knife from the ground and laughed heartily. "A person like you, who is full of ideals and brave enough to put them into practice, will definitely become a great doctor in the future." But Purnell hadn't expected the crown prince to actually support her. She started to stammer. I am a woman. Your Highness, do you think women can also be doctors?" "Of course." Joseph handed the knife back to her and nodded. "Being a doctor is just a profession. A woman is perfectly capable of doing it. If one day I were to get seriously ill, if that were to happen, it would likely be Dr. Purnell who saves my life. If I have the opportunity, I will even push for legislation to allow women to work in the medical field." "Oh, Your Highness, for God's sake, please tell me, do you really think that? Are you not mocking me?" "Of course." Joseph nodded sincerely. Purnell's heart suddenly began to beat violently. Someone as noble as the crown prince supports my ideal. What do I have to worry about anymore? Can my dream really come true? I've never heard anyone speak like you. She stared blankly at the crown prince. It felt like a dream. Everything around them lost its color. Only the crown prince shone brightly, just like an angel in a Raphael painting. He was so beautiful and holy. She suddenly covered her face and began to sob softly, releasing the grievances from the past and the joy of the present with her tears. "Wah! Thank you, Your Royal Highness." "Look at you! What are you crying for?" Joseph patted the girl's shoulder. He was about to comfort her when his stomach rumbled at an inopportune moment. Purnell was stunned for a moment. Then she chuckled and asked softly, "Your Highness, did you come to the kitchen for a late-night snack?" Joseph looked around, a little embarrassed, and said, "I am a little hungry, but all the chefs have disappeared. I came here for nothing." "The chefs? They probably went to transport the ingredients for tomorrow's meal." Joseph knew that there was a 99% chance the chefs were being lazy and sleeping, but he didn't call her out on it. After all, he had also secretly slept on the job many times when he worked late. "Your Highness, if you don't want to wait," Purnell said softly with a blush, as if she had put a lot of effort into it, "maybe I can make you something to eat?" She looked at the Crown Prince nervously, afraid he would laugh at her. "Sounds good," Joseph nodded happily. "Thank you very much." Fortunately, the fire in the royal kitchen stoves was never extinguished, and the ingredients were all ready. Purnell changed out of the apron she used for dissecting, carefully washed her hands, and began to get busy in front of the stove. In less than 20 minutes, a plate of foie gras poached in red wine, which smelled wonderful, was placed on the small table that the chefs used for tea. Next to it was a small dish of beet and tomato soup. Quixote, being very dutiful, tasted a little bit of everything. After confirming that there were no issues, he once again retreated to the side. Joseph had been starving. He took a sniff of the food, and his appetite was instantly stimulated. He picked up the utensils and was about to eat when he saw Purnell standing nervously by his side. He quickly waved to her. "You should come and eat too." The girl waved her hands repeatedly. "Thank you, Your Highness, but I won't eat. Please try it. Is it to your liking?" Joseph looked at the foie gras on the plate, which was enough for 3 people. He pulled her down without question, took another plate, divided the food equally, and said with a smile, "Why should you work so hard and then just watch me eat? Besides, I can't let the first female doctor in France go hungry." Purnell's face immediately turned red all the way to her ears. She lowered her head and quietly picked up her knife and fork. Joseph put a piece of golden brown foie gras and a slice of black truffle into his mouth. His mouth was instantly filled with a unique oily flavor, but it didn't feel greasy at all due to the regulation from the truffle. His teeth went through the crispy skin, and the foie gras underneath was tender and soft, melting in his mouth almost without resistance. Joseph's eyes narrowed in enjoyment. After swallowing a large piece of foie gras, he gave a thumbs up in praise. "This is amazing! If you didn't become a doctor, you would definitely be a great chef." "Really?" Purnell's eyes were filled with joy. "I just learned from Mr. Valiste in my Friesheim." Joseph cut another piece of foie gras and held it up to gesture. "To thank you for this meal, I have decided to give you a gift." No, I'm just happy that you like the food. How can I accept a gift from you?" Joseph smiled. "Don't be so modest. The clothes you were wearing when you were practicing dissection were long and cumbersome. I will have a tailor make a set of dedicated medical uniforms for you. Oh, they might be promoted nationwide in the future, so just think of it as helping me try them out." Purnell's face was as red as her ears. She lowered her head and said softly, "Thank you, Your Highness." The next morning, Purnell, as usual, waited for the Crown Prince to get up and then went to his chambers with her medical bag for his routine checkup. But unlike before, she didn't put on the dark powder on her face today. Her lips also remained their original color. Her face looked delicate and smooth, showing a healthy and fresh beauty. She came to Joseph, put down her medical bag, curtsied, and took out his medical record, asking, "Your Highness, do you still feel pain in your throat?" "Much better, just a little bit." "Are you coughing?" "Occasionally, but very rarely now." "Do you have phlegm?" "A little." The girl seriously wrote down each answer. Suddenly, she looked up and caught a glimpse of the handsome lines of Joseph's face. Her heart skipped a beat, and a thought flashed through her mind. "The Crown Prince is so handsome. Why didn't I notice it before?" Her face immediately turned red. Note 1. From the work Books Are a Portable Magic by W. Somerset Maugham, January 25, 1874, December 16, 1965. End of this chapter. Chapter 30. The pharmaceutical factory goes into production. Purnell hurriedly finished the routine checkup, picked up her medical bag, and fled the room like a frightened fawn, without looking back. However, after leaving the door, she quickly turned back and secretly glanced at the Crown Prince. Joseph looked at her retreating figure and blinked in surprise. Did she have a stomachache? South wing of the Palace of Versailles. In the Minister of Finance's office, Brienne took the tax bill, which was noticeably thinner, from Joseph's hands and asked with a puzzled look, "Your Highness, you seem to have deleted a lot of tax clauses." Joseph nodded. "Yes, this is an experiment of mine." Brienne quickly opened the bill and looked at the items one by one. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter. When he had read halfway through, he finally couldn't help but look at Joseph. "Your Highness, you have deleted all the clauses that were beneficial to the nobles?" "Yes, Archbishop." Brienne placed the bill back on the table and shook his head. "Why would you do that?" Joseph countered. "Do you think that by constantly making concessions, we will be able to get the bill passed?" Brienne shook his head. "Then that's it. So we might as well change our way of thinking. You can submit this bill to the Parliament and see what happens." Brienne sighed. "Your Highness, this will only anger the nobles and will not have any effect." Joseph smiled. "Have you ever watched a bullfight?" "A bullfight? Yes, Your Highness, I have." The bullfighter always tries to make the bull angry with a red cape. This is because an angry bull loses its mind and makes mistakes, giving the bullfighter an opportunity to strike, Joseph said. "Letting those nobles get angry isn't a bad thing. Please believe me, even if it is rejected again this time, this bill will be passed sooner or later." Brienne was half convinced. "Can you tell me what you plan to do?" "Don't try to reason with those people. Attack their weak points, divide and conquer, and at the same time control public opinion so that they can only bow their heads." Brienne looked at the Crown Prince's confident and somewhat cunning eyes in surprise. For some reason, he suddenly felt that he might not be just messing around. After a long time, Brienne nodded, and then he laughed. "Very well, I will send this bill to the Parlement, but please don't say that these changes were made by you. Otherwise, those greedy and selfish people will hold a grudge against you. And as for me, if I cannot get the bill implemented before the end of the year, I will probably have to leave the position of Minister of Finance. I might as well give it a try with the little time I have left." "Thank you for your trust." Joseph didn't expect to be able to persuade Brienne so quickly. He didn't waste any time and turned to his assistant. "Please contact the newspapers with the largest circulation in Paris and reserve prominent space. After the Parlement rejects the tax bill this time, immediately publish the first tax clause in the newspaper along with a detailed explanation of it. For example, who will pay this tax and what effects it will have. Publish one tax clause every day after that until the entire bill has been published and explained clearly in the newspaper." "Yes, Your Highness." In addition, organize a group of journalists to report in detail on the matter from the submission of the bill to the Parlement to refusal to register it. Oh, don't report it all at once. Write a little bit each time to maintain the buzz. "Yes. And also..." Joseph was busy in the Minister of Finance's office until noon. He finally finished giving his instructions for the preliminary work of promoting the tax bill, and after having lunch with the Queen, Aymard reported that Dr. Lamarck was asking to see him. Joseph followed him back to his drawing room and saw Lamarck pacing back and forth anxiously. "Mr. Lamarck, is there something wrong with the pharmaceutical workshop?" Lamarck quickly bowed respectfully. He first nodded. "There is something." He then seemed very nervous. "Your Highness, I heard that my daughter offended you last night. She is still young and definitely didn't do it on purpose. Please forgive her." Joseph smiled and waved his hand. Mademoiselle Purnell did nothing wrong. I accidentally walked into her laboratory. Oh, she even treated me to a late-night snack. Thank you for your generosity. Lamarck bowed again and muttered, I really shouldn't have agreed to let her study medicine. That child, she actually went to the royal kitchen in the middle of the night to dissect animals. Joseph said with approval, Purnell is very talented. You could actually let her practice dissection in the royal laboratory. Oh, if you don't want others to know, I can instruct the guards and servants to keep her secret. I don't even know what to say. Lamarck's eyes were filled with gratitude. You are truly too enlightened. If the people in the Academy of Medicine were half as enlightened as you, Purnell would have already gotten her medical license and saved many patients. Joseph saw the glass bottle in his hand and asked, By the way, you said there was something about the pharmaceutical workshop? Oh, yes. Lamarck quickly handed him the glass bottle, and his face lit up with excitement again. That perfume workshop is perfect. The equipment is very complete, and there's even a water wheel. I only added a few high-precision thermometers and a condenser, and that's enough to purify salicin. Also, the workers are very good. They are skilled, and many of them have experience with purification operations. Look, this is what the craftsman made last night. Mr. Lasserre and I didn't get involved at all. Joseph looked at the beige powder and nodded in satisfaction. He then asked, What do you estimate the output to be? Lamarck thought for a moment and said, If we have enough raw materials, it will be around 2,500 grams per day. After the workers become more proficient, it should double. That's basically enough for all the patients in Paris. It should also be able to supply some of the provinces, Joseph said. For medicinal use, salicin was used to reduce fever and inflammation. The daily dosage was about 0.5 grams. Paris only had a population of a little over 500,000, so 10,000 doses of medicine per day would be more than enough. Lamarck nodded. Your Highness, Mr. Lasserre and I estimated that each pill will contain 0.25 grams of salicin, and the cost will be about 3 to 4 deniers. We will sell it for 5 deniers initially, and then adjust the price based on the revenue and expenses. What do you think? 1 livre was equal to 20 sous, and 1 sou was equal to 12 deniers. This meant that 1 livre could buy 48 pills, which was an extremely affordable price. You can decide the price. Joseph then remembered his angel water and said to Lamarck, By the way, Mr. Lamarck, I have some special needs. Please specifically purify 300 grams of high-purity salicin for me every day. It should be as free of impurities as possible. A 200-gram bottle of skincare product only needed a little over 1 gram of salicin. 300 grams per day could be made into more than 200 bottles. This should be enough to test the market initially. Lamarck said without hesitation, No problem, Your Highness. On the evening of the same day that Joseph and Lamarck were discussing matters related to the pharmaceutical factory, in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, 400 kilometers away from Paris, the leader of the Patriot Party, Danderel, was welcoming guests from France. End of this chapter.